So how do you take deeply ingrained belief systems about I need someone to complete me, or you are the one, or there's only one, we fill in the blank of all these beliefs. How do you really undo those out of our own perception and then live in a different paradigm that's not fully supported yet by our culture and society, right? And for some people, that paradigm shift feels like easy, just changing their clothes. And they're like, oh, that, because they feel like they were already felt resonance with that. They just didn't know yet, And for some people, it's really hard because we're working at these deeper ingrained beliefs.
I'm Cindy Darnell. Welcome to The Erotic Philosopher, the podcast where we examine and explore sex and relationships through social, personal, cultural, scientific, political, and other lenses, and unpack and explore your erotic quandaries with the world's wisest erotic philosophers. Today's guest on The Erotic Philosopher is Jessica Fern. Jessica is a psychotherapist, certified clinical trauma professional, and author of the book Polysecure, Attachment, Trauma, and Nonmonogamy. In her international private practice, Jessica works with individuals, couples, and people in multi-partner relationships who no longer want to be limited by their reactive patterns, cultural conditioning, insecure attachment styles, and past traumas, helping them to embody new possibilities in life and love. Enjoy this discussion with Jessica Fern. Jessica, welcome to The Erotic Philosopher.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I am really thrilled that you've made some time to come and talk today to me and to the Erotic Philosopher audience about your fabulous, fabulous book. And before we get into that, I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself in your own words to what is potentially a new audience for you. What would you like people to know about you?
Yeah, I am a psychotherapist and a relationship coach. I'm a parent, I'm a spouse, I'm a lover, I'm a co-parent, right? And in a big life transition, just made a big move, was living out of the country and now back in the United States. So,
where were you living?
Yeah, we were living in Costa Rica.
Oh,
yeah.
How long were you there?
We were there for over a year, and we thought we were staying, but for reasons we won't get into, right? We were not going to stay, but we're in North Carolina now. So
okay,
yeah,
okay. So life happens to all of us, and movement and transition, I guess, really is sort of part of your book and how it works. So for those who are not familiar with Jessica's work and her recent rise, I think, to prominence, certainly in the sex and relationships community. It's an extraordinary book called Polysecure that I would encourage all of you to get a copy of and read and highlight. And I've got so many parts that I've highlighted already because I just love it. So let's start, Jessica, by talking about why you wrote this book. What was your motivation for writing this book?
Yeah, my motivation on a very broad level was to support, to help, but it was, specifically wanting to fill a gap because I saw how so many people genuinely want to do polyamory, non-monogamy, and it's hard. Right? So it's like me wanting to make sense. Like, why is this so hard? And the answer isn't go back to monogamy, right? That's not the solution. How do they move through the hard into something new, right? Versus this is hard, let's go back to the old, right? So it was just many hours of listening to people and their struggles and helping them sort through it, and my own struggles and my own opening up process and, iterations of that. And the attachment ruptures that can come sort of became one of the explanations. My next book will go into the other ones. We could talk about that later, but the attachment piece was a primary one.
Yeah. And so, as you know, and I know, and a lot of the folks listening know, that, you know, the notion of attachment and attachment styles has become especially popular in the last, maybe say 5 years, probably through, you know, because of social media, even though the notion of attachment's been around for decades.
Been around for a while, right?
It's, you know, it's really popular now on a lot of social media sites where people get a lot of their sex and relationships information. And as a lot of people listening would also understand, it tends to err towards monogamy. It tends to err towards assuming even a very heteronormative example too. And while that part may have changed, there may be discussions around attachment that now include, you know, queerness and various things like that. It does still tend to hold an alliance with, you know, the period of time that attachment theory came up in, you know, the mid 20th century. So it really is based in values of an era that is not quite finished, but it's certainly on its way out. And yet still, we've got people in both monogamous and non-monogamous relationships trying to, you know, fit themselves into this old model of attachment and security in particular. And you've come through with this extraordinary assessment of how these so-called attachment styles actually can apply to us when we are navigating relationships outside the square.
Yeah.
Where did you even start to do that?
Yeah. It was a partner of mine and we were reading about attachment, and we were partners that were never going to live together. We had our own kids with other partners that we nested with. So we didn't call each other secondary, but for people listening, we were sort of more in that, like, we're each other's secondary, you know, and that was good. It really works for us. And, but as he started to share, he was like, I have a really anxious attachment. So I was like, oh, well, let's work on this. Like, we don't have to just, you know, oh, now we're forever going to be anxiously attached. Like, let's work towards secure attachment. And as we started to read the more recent and popular stuff, he was just like, well, like, I get a text. He's like, well, that's bullshit. We can't do any of the things they tell us to do. And I was like, oh, you're right. I'm not going to give up on this, though. You know, so how can I comb through and tease apart, like, what can we do? And, you know, and what are new things that some of those books don't even say that we can do that are more relevant to the non-monogamous, you know, relationship structure.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That's sort of.
And I saw, you know, in your book, you referenced an article that was written by another therapist who was saying that, you know, if you're in an open relationship or a non-monogamous relationship, and for the ease of clarity, I'm going to use those phrases interchangeably. I mean anything that's not a monogamous relationship, right? So whether you're a swinger or whether you're in a full-blown polyamorous, you know, throuple or more beyond. And this article that you referenced in the book was saying that, you know, if tension, you know, arises in your other relationships, you must come back to the primary relationship. So it was still privileging this idea of the monogamous union is, you know, the centerpiece. It's the hierarchical model. And then all the subsequent secondary and tertiary partners, you know, have less power and less sway. And then you mentioned in the book that you took this to a conference and people were like, so, I mean, and I think that what you've done is fabulous with this, where you say, you know, we can build relational intimacy even in non-hierarchical models, and that we have to work with what we've got. So talk us through some of these kind of ideas and how people might apply them based on either your own experience or things that you know of other people trying that have been, you know, I don't want to say successful, but certainly, you know, something that opens up conversations.
Yeah. So what you're getting at is this way that a lot of the ways that people are sort of told to have their safety and security in relationship are these structural things. We are married. We own a home. We have shared finances. We have children, you know. We are officially on Facebook together as a couple, like whatever. But these sort of, external, structural, legal, institutionalized ways. I'm not anti any of those things, right? But what I say in the book is, but what happens when we're trying to, you pull that structure away when people enter non-monogamy, and sometimes they realize, oh, wow, I don't actually feel emotionally safe with this person that I thought I was secure with, right? Because I was relying on the structure. So I want people to really cultivate the relational experience you're having. Am I showing up for you? Are you showing up for me, right? Are we tuning into each other, right? Are we responsive in a loving way to each other?
Yeah. And that really flies in the face of so much that we are taught about intimacy and sex and relationships being, the story that when you meet the right person, everything just falls into place, as if, the right, in air quotes, relationship is effortless. And you're saying, no, it doesn't even matter what kind of relationship you're in. It's still going to require you to show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. If that's what you're agreeing to. So in the book too, I talk about attachment-based relationships, and all the people that we might call lovers or, have certain experiences or connections with might not actually be our more attachment-based relationships, but we can have multiple attachment-based relationships, right? And those are the ones that it's this takes investment, it takes time, and it's wonderful, it's fulfilling, and it also takes work.
Yeah, right. And I think that that's the thing that, when I think about it, perhaps through the lens even of a sort of a family dynamic where there are multiple members of a family and each person relates to the other members of the family through, multiple kinds of dynamics. Sometimes it's an easy connection, sometimes it's a more complicated connection. Do you think that, if we're talking about these sorts of relational dynamics with multiple adult lovers, partners, could we look at it through a similar sort of lens that we would look at a broader family unit, chosen or otherwise?
Right. And that's sort of what's funny about all of this, because it's sort of rooted in the family, but you're you didn't take the lessons of the family and transfer them, right? We don't have usually we don't have one parent or one grandparent or one sibling or no siblings, just one, you can only have one child, right? So we sort of know, we have multiple attachment bonds to each parent. We can have different attachment styles. Now we know with step parents and blended families, we have attachment to those. We have attachment to our siblings, and other family members, or mentors and important teachers that come along in our life, right? So, and as adults, it's not just romantic. We have close friends that are attachment figures. Family of choice, right?
Yeah. And this, I think, is such a crucial, next step in how we, I think, as a species, and obviously with a very Western bias, and I don't know if you've done much research into other non-Western cultures, I have not, but, through a Western lens, if the next frontier for us is even sort of decentralizing romantic relationships as the primary source of emotional nourishment culturally and socially, and that we start to, I don't want to say outsource, but perhaps insource love through other relational contexts.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, several people, but I think Esther Perel said it very clearly, if we're expecting in one person what an entire village used to give us, it's just not sustainable.
No, it's really not sustainable. And with so many traditional marriages ending in divorce, which, again, I say to my clients, a divorce is not necessarily a failure. I mean, relationships often have, they have a lifespan, they have a duration, they don't always last forever, and a relationship that runs its course is not necessarily a failure. That said, if we are willing to learn how to be in relationships more robustly, that with these skills, as you describe, we are in a position where we can actually create and sustain multiple relationships, possibly for longer, simply because when a lot of relationships do fall apart, it's because we don't have the skills to nourish them.
Yeah, right. Or the support around us from others. Yeah, the people to go to.
What's the response to your book been like?
It's been incredible. Right. You'd think I would get slandered and slashed. Right. How dare I talk about polyamory and non-monogamy and attachment? The book response has been so positive, yeah, overwhelmingly positive. So I'm grateful. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And so, with the you talk about this heart metaphor in the book. I'd like to invite you to sort of extrapolate a little bit on that and how folks might be able to use some of those notions in their relationships.
Yeah, so HEARTS is the acronym I use to come up with, okay, great, there's this attachment thing. We've talked about it a while. Here's sort of some of the how-to. Like, here's some of the things you can do in your multiple partner relationships that are cultivating this secure attachment, where I'm not telling you to do monogamous things, right? Or just structural things, right? So these are relational experience. So the acronym is H is here, about being present. E is express delight. A is attunement. R is rituals and routines. T is turning towards after conflict, and S is secure attachment with self, where you you do those first 5 to yourself. Yeah. And so you can ask away about the heart part, but the S also feels so important because I think we all need it, regardless of your relationship structure or relationship status. But in non-monogamy especially, there's more complexity, there's more unknowns, there's more ups and downs. And so really having that inner stability is necessary.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of relationship advice manuals and such tend to skip over, is that we don't look at our relationship to ourselves and our ability to take care of and support ourselves and to tend to some of the, the insecurities, if you will, that exist within all of us. And I think, feeling insecure and feeling anxious is normal. It's part of the human condition. It's how we are. And so bringing that into relationships and saying, hey, partner, even if it's non-monogamous, hey, partner, fix me, hold me, soothe me, be my person,
make me better.
Take all my pain away, is a really heavy way to come into relationships.
Exactly. And it just doesn't become, again, sustainable. We've said that word before, of just like every time your partner's on a date and you need them to be the only one that makes you feel better because you're having anxiety. It's like, yeah, this isn't going to work. Right. But it's not either or, because I think, some of the poly community, non-monogamy community aspects of it have gone too far when it comes to things like jealousy, where it's like, oh, it's just all your shit, deal with it. Where it's like, yes, there's probably personal insecurities coming up, and jealousy can also be a sign of a relational thing that needs to get addressed. So the heart and the S, the hearts is really like, it's both, not either or. We need to do our own inner work and we need to do our relational work. And that's what the next book is about, the rest of the other struggles. Because one of the struggles is, there's this attachment shift that happens, whether it's with the partner you're opening up with, or if you're not opening up with someone, you can feel more insecure in an attachment way than you previously did, right? The other ones are things like, how on earth do we do a paradigm change? And not just any paradigm change, one of the most deeply ingrained paradigms that we're still, excavating, right? That we're just in the very beginnings of, things like gender and race and sexual orientation are a little bit further along, right? Still not done, but a little bit further along in terms of the waves, right? So how do you take deeply ingrained belief systems about, I need someone to complete me, or you are the one, or there's only one, we fill in the blank of all these beliefs, right? Or it's bad to want someone else. And I shouldn't want someone else. If I want someone else, it's a sign that my partner's not enough. Or if they want someone else, it's a sign that I'm not enough. It's just deficiency story, How do you really undo those out of our own perception and emotional, because it really informs our emotional reactions, and then live in a different paradigm, that's not fully supported yet by our culture and society, right? So that's a big one, just how do you live in another world, basically, right? And for some people, that paradigm shift feels like easy, like just changing their clothes, and they're like, oh, that, because they feel like they were already felt resonance with that. They just didn't know yet, and for some people, it's really hard. Yeah. Because we're working at these deeper ingrained beliefs, One of the big ones after that is opening up from a relationship. It will expose all the cracks in the foundation. That's what I say, right? It really has this amazing way of exposing everything that was problematic or invisible, but actually there, right? Like kind of under the carpet, right? Like all the stuff that you're like, oh, I can tolerate that. And then you open up and you're like, that's completely not tolerable. Yeah. Or, oh, we have these issues around power dynamics or money, or, really poor communication with each other, really disrespectful ways of relating to each other that non-monogamy puts a complete spotlight on, right? So here you are trying to open up, live in a different paradigm, date other people while processing years, decades of baggage from your relationship. That's a lot, right? That's an undertaking. Yeah.
It really is a lot.
Yeah. And what comes with that is usually looking at codependency, right? Is a lot of couples, sort of the mono-romantic ideal really promotes a lot of codependency, like you complete me, right? And then, but to do non-monogamy, we really need to be autonomous. And honestly, even in monogamy, to do true intimacy, we actually need to be differentiated and autonomous, right? But many people have not done healthy differentiation in their relationship that they're opening up from. And it's again, that's a really hard process to go through with just you and that partner, but now we have other partners at play too.
Yeah. Is it something that you think sometimes folks should sort of step back from relating with others while they're doing this work? Do you think some people are able to do it simultaneously while being in multiple relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I see it all, right? Of course, the more monogamous way of thinking is, well, just step back from others and fix the in-house first, right? But it's like, well, that's not always possible. You might have people that you're in love with and committed to, or don't want to just say, sorry, I'm closing my other relationship now, and you're not the one I'm closing with, right? So sometimes if, people can, and they take some time and they're really investing in doing the work, that's fine. But sometimes they have to do it simultaneously, and they can. Yeah. It's just, yeah, you're working double duty.
Right. Right. And what are some of the most common struggles that people have?
Well, I think the common struggles or the common complaints would be things like dealing with jealousy, managing anxiety, managing scheduling. We can't seem to get on the same page about either what kind of style of non-monogamy we want, or we keep breaking agreements. Like those are the sort of, but I call those the symptoms, and they're the symptoms of these deeper issues. Like there hasn't been differentiation. You're in a new paradigm. There's attachment ruptures and attachment primal panic coming up. One of the ones I didn't name was like a skills boot camp. You don't have all the skills you need, right? there's a huge skill upgrade that's needed to do non-monogamy in a way that, feels really fulfilling and functional, right? And a lot of people are like humbled, like, oh, right, I actually don't know how to communicate what I think, need, and feel. Right? I don't even know how to identify that, let alone communicate it and then negotiate it and hear what my partner wants and how do we do this, right? So yeah, the things that are like the complaints have to do with sort of what I'm calling the more deeper rooted issues.
Yeah. And these exist in multiple kinds of relationship dynamics because they're sort of human qualities. And I like in the book that you mentioned, and I was sort of looking for the part, but I can't quite find it, that there is this, often what is mixed up in this traditional relationship values that is often conflated with codependency that can sometimes actually be masking in attachment language what we would call insecurity or anxiety. How do you think as a society we ended up so far off the track of what actually gives us the relational fulfillment that so many of us crave? How did we get so lost?
Oh, it's such a good question. I want like an hour to think through that one. Like, I'm going to have my answer later this evening. Like, that's what I say, I mean, I think it's thousands of years in the making at this point. Like, as humans, we have disconnected ourselves from nature, and that's probably the deepest, oldest roots that we think we are the being out of relationship with nature, as if that's even possible, and then seeing nature as something that we can colonize, extract from, utilize for our benefit, objectifying the planet and nature, right? Possessing it, owning it. And so I think through time, as we've disconnected from that, it has led to many things, right? Like, okay, fast forward a few thousands of years to the Industrial Revolution. Now we have the whole way a village and a family functions is now completely different. And the idea of the nuclear family happens, right? Because we need to live in cities. And right. So just, yeah, I think really many of us don't know what we actually need even as individuals to be healthy. Like healthy water, healthy food, like healthy sleep, right? Like, and so let alone then what does it mean to be in relationship, right? Yeah.
And that level, I mean, even that metaphor of, nourishment around that most of us don't know how to nourish ourselves just through our diet and physical self-care.
Exactly. Yeah.
That relational self-care becomes this, fundamentally foreign thing, especially because we've been told from a very young age, you'll find the one, you'll just know there is only the one. And if you lose the one, then it's because you fucked up or,
it's something, your fault, right?
It's your fault or you strayed or something like that.
Right. Or you have some kind of an addiction, right? This sort of pathologizing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and so this model really invites people into not only having, a profound, deep connection with themselves, but also multiple people at the same time and raising themselves up to be, better partners, better family members, better community people, better citizens. So the flow-on effect, if folks are willing to do this work, is phenomenal. I mean, we could, it's, to me, when I think about it, it's quite revolutionary, in terms of actually creating social change where we are then compelled to start sharing resources. We are compelled to start thinking more relationally, more broadly than mine is mine, yours is yours, fuck you if you don't have as much as me, or if you have more than me, I'm in need, and creating these sort of implied power dynamics that could change if we all were willing to do the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the attachment work is one of, not the only way, of course, but one way that really can ripple out at all these different levels.
And I like, in your book, you also, one of the chapters is somewhere sort of in the first half of the book, you go through a lot of statistics and a lot of data about how people in non-monogamous relationships experience attachment, experience security, experience insecurity. And that you mentioned that you found a lot of people in variations on open relationships experienced often the same levels of security as people in so-called, monogamous relationships. With this data coming through now, how do you think that's going to potentially affect the mainstream sort of, relationships coaching and relationship therapy world, and also the training that new therapists, because a lot of young therapists and therapists in training listen to this podcast. How is this new data, do you think, going to influence how we teach relationship therapy in colleges, or how should it change?
Yeah. I had a professor who reached out and said, I'm going to make your book as part of, one of the reading on the curriculum. And I was like, that's amazing. Like, to think a new therapist would interface with this, right? Because even therapists, we have our judgments and our biases and our unchecked privileges, right? And so it's been so sad how many clients of mine, talk about sort of feeling alienated, judged, pathologized by their own therapist, right? Because the assumptions that if you're non-monogamous, it's because you have a secure attachment, that was the cause of your non-monogamy, right? And thankfully, the very small amount of research that's come out says that's not actually the case, So yeah, my hope is that it really will support therapists in embracing this different way of being, this different structure of relationship that's totally viable, and not to just go down the route of pathologizing it because it's different.
Yeah. And that as we, as therapists and clinicians and coaches, begin to see our own biases and also begin to, a lot of therapists and coaches haven't done the work themselves, or they have done little bits of it. But I think it becomes very embodied when we do it ourselves, whether we are, and this is not to say that everybody should be non-monogamous. I don't think that necessarily, but the work involved, whether you're monogamous or non-monogamous, still stands. That relational self-intimacy, that relational self-care is just omitted from so much of the relationship therapy literature. It's just not there.
Right. It's often not there. And I think also that a lot of times when there is, maybe an affair or cheating that's happened, the sort of typical way of working with it, like a fair treatment, like a fair recovery, doesn't always include this non-monogamous possibility or frame, I'm thinking of someone I'm working with who sort of was the third to a marriage, and him and the wife in the marriage want to be together genuinely in a non-monogamous way. But the husband and wife in the marriage are seeing a therapist that is just saying, you can't talk to him ever again. Shame on you. You messed up. You mess up again, you're going to get divorced, right? And it's like, this isn't working for her, And so, right. So even how we work with affairs, not that every affair should become a non-monogamous situation. I'm not saying that at all. But a lot of people are having affairs because they actually don't feel themselves to be non-monogamous. And can we even just ask that question to someone,
Do they feel like they are non-monogamous?
Right. Like, oh, maybe you're cheating because you actually don't feel like you can do non-monogamy. It's not actually what you want versus, fill in the blank of all the reasons that are given. Right?
Yeah. It's so interesting, the few times that I attempted to be in monogamous relationships, and I think I've probably only attempted it maybe 2 or 3 times. And each time for me, it was a disaster because, and this is like going back in, the last 30 years of my adult life. And I mean, when I first encountered the notion of non-monogamy, it was probably about 15 or so years ago. And even though I sort of read about it, it also felt very foreign to me, And then what I realized later was actually, if I had been, if I had known about the possibility, if I had even heard of it 30 years ago, it would have altered the trajectory of my relational life. But I didn't find out about it until about 15 years ago. And then my initial reaction was, oh, I don't think I could ever do that. Fast forward a couple of years, I looked back at the history of my, unsatisfying monogamous relationships and went, oh my God, I've been non-monogamous all this time and I hadn't even known that about
Didn't
myself.
Even know it was an option.
It was a real kind of awakening of that was why, because in my traditional relationships, I always felt squashed and stifled, even though I didn't necessarily want to go out and do anything with anybody else. I just knew that I wasn't content with the model as it was, but it didn't occur to me that I had a choice.
Yeah.
That was groundbreaking for me.
Yeah, there's something I hear a lot, especially on a more personal level when I talk to people about polyamory or when me and my first husband opened up. So many people were like, oh, that would have saved my first marriage. I heard that so many times. Yeah. Like, oh, that could have changed the trajectory, like you're saying, of just my whole relationship path, It's
amazing what knowledge can do for us in our darkest hour is, and again, which is why this book is so incredibly important. So let's skip forward to your forthcoming book. What's the gist? What can we look forward to?
Yeah, so a lot of the things we named, sort of what are the other challenges, the deeper rooted issues that people are facing, experiencing in this opening up path or further along on their polyamory path. Yeah. And then, of course, suggestions and tips on how do you work through it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's often, the part that people really want to hear and what they want to see is, the how-to guide sort of, non-monogamy for dummies kind of approach, which sometimes it is straightforward and sometimes it's not. I mean, often the solutions are simple but not easy, right?
Yeah, exactly. But before that book comes out, the Polysecure Workbook is going to be coming out. So that's exciting. Yeah, we created a workbook that accompanies Polysecure, but just has hundreds of new questions, different exercises, a lot on things like working through boundaries and just all that stuff. So it's really for healing your own attachment and then doing this working, with your 1, 2, 3 or no partners in terms of secure attachment.
Yeah. And I think that's also one of the things that, folks feel like, oh, I can't do any of my, I can't do any relational work until I'm in a relationship. And it's like, you're in a relationship with yourself the whole time.
Exactly.
It's the perfect time to do relationship work.
It is.
When there's no one bothering you. So
yeah. I mean, I feel like whenever I'm single, I just go up a developmental level or two because I'm able to okay, why did that happen? I can go deeper into that, my end of that work.
It's so good. So when can we expect the workbook to come out?
Hopefully the workbook will be, hopefully the fall or towards the end of the year. Yeah. And then the next book will be 2023. Yeah.
Okay. Fantastic. So, Jessica, I'm going to put the links that you sent me for people to contact you in the show notes, and certainly by Googling your name, Jessica Fern, people can also find you and interact with you through whichever platforms you have there. As we wrap up, Jessica, again, I just want to thank you for your time and thank you for your kindness and your extraordinary intelligence, your emotional intelligence, your intellectual intelligence, your somatic intelligence. And I wish you all the best with the forthcoming publications, and I will get all of them because I just think your work is so important in our field. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for just creating this.
The world of relationships is so incredibly complicated and then also really simple. And it's on each of us as humans, whether we're in partnerships or not, whether we're monogamous or non-monogamous or whatever we are. It really is on us to do our parts, to do our work, to make ourselves as serviceable, let's say, for relationships as possible. And that is really about us managing our emotions, managing our desires, managing our quirks and nooks and crannies. It's not about becoming perfect, but it is about showing up with as much of ourselves as we can and less reactive to the stuff that causes us pain, that makes us say and do things we later regret, and more about the insight and awareness to be able to show up, hold ourselves, and be more of ourselves in our relationships as those relationships grow and change. As Jessica was explaining so beautifully, these things come through in so many different kinds of relationship styles. So if you're struggling with non-monogamy, I encourage you to get Jessica's book, Polysecure. It's a wonderful read. It's an easy read, while not simple, and helps you understand where some of those pings and pains and traumas are coming from, and also the workbook to help you put into place some of the lessons that the theory book points out. And speaking of books, you know what? My book is coming out very soon, or maybe it's already come out, depending on when you're listening to this. It is called Sex When You Don't Feel Like It, The Truth About Mismatched Libido and Rediscovering Desire. It's a book for partners of all descriptions, all orientations, monogamous and non-monogamous, about navigating that dreaded problem of mismatched libido in relationships. My goodness, it happens. It happens to all of us. It's happened to me. Maybe it's happening to you right now. Let me tell you, there are ways through it, and my book shows you how. To find out more about my book, head to my website, cindydarnell.com, CyndiDarnell.com. You'll see the book tab there where you can order it and get started today. While you're hanging out on my website, check out the home of the Erotic Philosopher podcast. You'll see a link there to leave us a rating and a review on iTunes. And even if you don't listen on iTunes, we would love it if you still left a rating and a review on iTunes. That's where people go to find out about podcasts like this, and your ratings and reviews make us more visible with the algorithms to put us in front of more people just like you who want to improve their relationships. Follow us on social media. We are at The Erotic Philos, that's PHILOS, on Instagram and Twitter. And you can follow me, Cindy Darnell, also on Instagram and Twitter at Cindy_Darnell. While you're on my website, check out the suite of online classes there in the Online Pleasure School. You'll find something there for everyone, with more classes dropping soon. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Erotic Philosopher and all the previous episodes of The Erotic Philosopher. And we'll be back next time with more guests, more quandaries, and more sex, pleasure, and relationships info into your ears. Until then, take care.